Hi, everybody, and welcome to my kitchen. I am health coach Evey Schweig, and today we are going to be making a little twist on a classic dish. We are going to be making an unstuffed cabbage roll. So, for many of you who have done cabbage rolls before, you know that it involves getting cabbage leaves and blanching them and rolling them up and putting them in a casserole dish and putting a tomato sauce on top. Well, instead, what we're going to do today is do a really quick one pan version of that. So, this is one of the recipes that we are doing currently this week with our Harvest Your Natural Energy Cleanse program. So, welcome everyone who is looking in, who is joining the cleanse. It's a pleasure to have you. It's so much fun to have you in my kitchen. So let's take a look at this. This is a nice low carb dish as well, because what we're going to be doing is we are going to be putting it over, instead of adding rice, we will be using cauli rice. And I'll be doing that recipe as well. So it's kind of a twofer today, right? So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to prep some of my ingredients, one of which is onions, which I just want to do with a nice dice of my onions. Gotta move this cabbage out of the way. By the way, have you ever seen a cabbage this big? I couldn't find a smaller cabbage today when I was out chopping. So we'll be talking about that a little bit too, for amounts in the recipe. All right, so just giving a nice chop to this onion. It's a small onion. You can use half onion if you have a large onion. Just a regular white onion. And what I did was I cut the onion in half, and then I kind of cut down into it about 4/5 of the way, but not all the way through, so that it stays together while I'm chopping. And I'll cut horizontally across. And then I'll go down through so I get a nice dice as I am chopping. There you go. You can see. And I just take this last end piece then and chop it. Maybe I'll give it a little turn and chop it again, so it is also nice small slices, nice small dice. All right, so I have my onion now. I'm gonna do, let me just scoop that up and get it out of the way. I have a nice little handy dandy scraper here that will do that for me. All right, a couple other things that I need to prep for this would be my garlic. I actually have this wonderful head of garlic from my garden. It's the first year that I've ever grown garlic. Has anybody else grown garlic before? Have you been successful with it? Curious to know. These tend to be a little bit difficult to peel, but boy, the flavor is delicious, and each head is really big. The recipe calls for 2 garlic cloves. These are actually kind of big. I could probably get away with just using 1, but I really like garlic, so I am going to stick with 2 cloves of garlic. All right, it's being a little stubborn to peel. I'm used to that with this garlic. Get some of this paper out of the way. What I like to do when it's being stubborn with peeling is I just kind of cut it in half, a clove in half, and that helps me get to the peel a little bit easier. That one came off a little bit easier than the other one did. If it's still there, I'll show you another trick. Let me see if I can get some more of this one off. All right. So what I have now is I have my garlic cloves halved, and I'm just going to, because I want to mince them, I'm going to give them a good smash. Thought that one went on the floor, but I caught it just in time. If the skin was still on, it comes off really nicely after you give it that little smash. And then what I'm going to do is get rid of all of that. And I'm just going to give this a nice dice. All right, so then I have my garlic nicely prepped. I like to prep my ingredients ahead of time so they're all ready to go when I start cooking. I'm going to put that next to the onions there. Get my hands rinsed. Oh, that is fragrant garlic. All right, now we get to work with our cabbage. So as I said, really big cabbage. The recipe calls for about 2 pounds of cabbage. This is 4.5 pounds, and I already took the outer leaves off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut it in half. Easier said than done sometimes. There we go. And I like to cut it down through the stem, so I still have the stem down here along the bottom. And I want to do a nice thin slice for this. I'm going to take this outer leaf off as well because there's some damage on it. And so what I'm going to do, actually, it might be easier if I actually quarter this so that I can get around it a little bit. Now, if you have a mandolin, you can easily slice your cabbage using a mandolin. I am doing about, I would say, 1/4 inch slices. I'm going to cut all the way down. And there's a little bit of damage on that last end, so I'm not going to do that. And I might just go through one more time just so that the slices aren't as long, so long. I'm going to grab a bowl to put that in, just to get it out of our way. One of the things I love about cooking in my kitchen is I know exactly where everything is, so I can just go reach for it. I don't have to worry that I forgot something. Okay, so we've got 1/4 of that cabbage chopped up. Let's get the other 1/4 chopped up. I like to use a nice rocking motion as I chop. It helps me guide these slices. It's one of the reasons why I chopped it into quarters, because the size allows me to do that. I'm going to add this to the bowl. All right, here we go. Just a little bit more here. I might actually give this another chop down so that it's easier to slice. All right. And I am going to avoid using the actual stem. I've read places where it says it's more bitter. I just find it makes big heavy chunks that don't cook as quickly at the same rate as the rest of the cabbage. So what I will do is save that and put it in the freezer until I'm ready to make some vegetable broth. And I will add it to that vegetable broth, and it'll give it a wonderful, rich flavor. How many of you remember that cabbage soup diet? I think it was probably back in the 80s that was so popular. I think all you did was eat cabbage soup. I never did it, but I remember a lot of my friends were doing it back then. Okay. So we have our cabbage now, all chopped up and ready to go. One last ingredient are my tomatoes. Now, what I'm going to do is, the recipe calls for 3 cups of diced tomatoes or 2 cans, 15-ounce cans of diced tomatoes. I have some leftover tomatoes that are very ripe and some that are from my garden that are just left over that are super sweet and flavorful. So I'd love to add some of those in. So I'm going to chop those up. And I learned a little trick. And I've done it with grapes before. I'm hoping it's going to work with the tomatoes. We'll find out. These are little cherry tomatoes, and I want to chop them in half. So I've done this with grapes, as I said. If you put it on an inverted dish, the lip of the dish prevents it from rolling all around. What you do is you put another plate on top, and then I like to use a serrated knife, but any sharp, if you have a super, super sharp knife, you can do that. The serrated knife works nicely. What you do is you just go along and through, and now all of your tomatoes are halved. Isn't that fun? Real quick. Little tricks. All right. So I have about a cup and a half. A cup of tomatoes here. Not quite a cup and a half, but I think that that's going to be fine. It's just enough to give that flavor. So let's get cooking then, right? We were prepping. Prepping is so important. It's something that we've been talking about in our cleanse, that if you prepare ahead of time, when you have the time to do so, you are more likely to be eating healthy, because when you come home during the week, say, when things are really busy, you don't have time to cook, we tend to grab things or order things that are not so healthy for us. So this is one way to ensure that you're eating healthier. So I just have a hot plate here. I figured it's easier than me turning around every time to use my stove. So what I want to do is I want to heat up my skillet. I have a nice deep skillet here, and I'm thinking it's going to be big enough. I hope so. Sometimes you can use Dutch oven, which is, the deeper ones. We'll see how this works. I figured this would be easier for me to demonstrate. So I'm just heating up the skillet first. It's nice to heat your skillet up before you add your oil. While we're waiting for that to heat up a little bit, I'm going to open up. I have some organic ground turkey here, 1 pound. Let me open up that container. And what we're going to do is we're going to brown our turkey, but we're also going to brown our onions. And we're going to kind of speed things up by doing them almost simultaneously. Sometimes these plastic covers can really be difficult to open. All right, so that's nice and heated. I'm going to add in my oil. And I put in maybe about 2 teaspoons in there. And I'm going to add in my onion that I chopped before. And I'm going to hold back on the garlic. Garlic tends to cook very quickly, and it loses a lot of its flavor if you overcook it. So I'm going to add that in later on. I'm going to get the onion sizzling here. And I'm going to add in I'm going to let that, I coated all of the onion with the oil. And just to speed up the process, I'm going to add in my ground turkey. We're using turkey in this recipe instead of ground beef because poultry is a fall food, according to traditional Chinese medicine. When we eat foods that are in season, like poultry and cabbage, we actually are helping our bodies acclimate to the season. We stay healthier. It helps improve our immune system. By cooking healthy and avoiding those processed foods, remember I was saying by prepping and having foods available that are healthy, we avoid eating processed foods that have a lot of these ingredients now, chemicals and additives, that actually are challenging our body and create inflammation. Inflammation is nothing more than a response to an injury, and our body sees these things as injuring them. So we want to be eating healthy and clean, and this helps us do that. So we've got our turkey cooking. I want it to cook through until it's fully cooked. So I am going to put this on the stove and let it saute on its own for a little bit. Hopefully, I'll be able to keep track of it. I'm going to put my hot plate here to the side for a minute, because while that's going on, I want to show you how to make the cauli rice. So cauli rice is nothing more than cauliflower that's been ground up into little grain-size shapes about the size of rice. So I have here about a half head of cauliflower. It's probably about 2 pounds again. Let's see. Let's just see. I'm just curious to see how much it is. Yep. About 2 pounds. What I'm going to do is I just have the large blade in my Cuisinart. I'm noticing that my Wi-Fi here is not behaving well. I hope that the transmission is okay for you. So what I'm going to do is, let me get some things out of the way so you can see. I'm going to take my knife and cut the stem. So I've got 4 sections now, and just break the cauliflower into smaller florets. Let me just give my turkey a stir here. It's doing well, it's browning nicely. Another reason I did that is because I don't have an exhaust above my island here, but I do have it above the stove. So I thought it might be good to have all of those greasy vapors going up the vent. Cauliflower is actually one of the few things, I always talk about the color, how important color is to be eating in your vegetables. Cauliflower is actually one of those that is white, but really, really good for you. Very high in vitamin C. Vitamin C also helps our immune system. So this time of year, as we're entering the cold and flu season, we really want to be adding in those foods that are going to keep us healthy. We can take vitamins, but vitamins I like to think of as insurance. They're not the main thing we should be thinking about. We should be thinking about getting the nutrients from our food, because our body is used to assimilating them from this source. All right, let me grab my lid that I put over here. And I'm just going to pulse it. Let me give it a stir. Make sure all those florets are down toward the bottom so they all get ground up evenly. What I don't want is to have big pieces left. Ah, that's perfect. So what it looks like right now is it looks like cooked rice. All right, so I'm just going to put this to the side now, and we will get back to cooking this in a moment. In the meantime, I can get rid of this blender, or the processor, and we can get back to our original recipe. Sometimes cooking is about multitasking. The more you do it, the more used to it you get. So, our turkey is just about done here. Can you see all that steam? Smells delicious. Just a little bit more pinkness to it. I'm going to let that cook up 1 minute more. And I'm going to add, while this is browning, I'm going to add in my garlic. so that that gets a chance to cook a little bit. And I'm going to add in a generous teaspoon of basil and a generous, sorry, that was oregano. Here's my basil. I'm going to give it a little, I like a good rounded teaspoon, probably about a teaspoon and a half. And I'm going to mix that in. All of a sudden it's smelling like my Italian grandma's house. All those seasonings, the garlic, the oregano, and the basil. All right, I'm going to add in some salt. I'm going to add in about a teaspoon of salt. Usually I just kind of do a pinch or so in, but since I'm doing the demonstration, I figure I'll measure it in. And I'm also going to add in about a teaspoonful of black pepper. If you have white pepper, fall is also a season for white pepper, so white pepper would be good as well. I do not have any on hand right now, so I'm just going to add in a generous sprinkle of that black pepper. Stir that in. You know, whatever you're sauteing and things on the bottom of your saute pan seem to be burning, you could always add a little bit of liquid. You could add some broth, you could add some water, and that will loosen up and continue the process of the sauteing. I have some fresh parsley that luckily I had prepped earlier in the week as part of the cleanse. I'm going to add in about 1 tablespoon of chopped parsley. And I think I am going to add in some water, just so that nothing burns. Because I can see it's browning on the bottom there. All right, stirring in my parsley. I added in about half of 2 tablespoons, so I added in about a tablespoon. I'll add in the other half later on. All right, so at this point, I can now add in my tomatoes. So I'm going to add in the tomatoes that I chopped in half. And I'm going to also open up a can of organic diced tomatoes that I have. Always look for PBA, bisphenol, BPA-free cans, especially for acidic foods like tomatoes, because they tend to be lined with a plastic so that they don't react to the metal of the can. But they have found that the bisphenol A that the plastic liner is made out, used to be made out of, is carcinogenic. The brand I use is actually from Costco. Organic and BPA free. Okay, and so I added in my tomatoes now. I added in that can of tomatoes. You can see it's getting to look a little tomatoey. Now, I've got all of this cabbage. So we'll see how lucky we are if I can fill in. If I can't fit it all in at once, what I will do is I'm going to put a lid on it and let it cook down a little bit, and then I'll add in the rest. I'm really pushing it here. I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to remove this then to the back burner, literally the back burner. All right, and I'm going to put a lid on it. I'm just going to turn that down so it doesn't burn. I'm going to give it a few minutes then to cook down. All right, so that is the first part of the recipe. right? So that's the unstuffed cabbage roll part of the recipe. But as I said, typically cabbage rolls have rice in it. So what we're going to do now is we're going to make that cauli rice. So I chopped up the rice, and I am going to uh, add it in. Now there's a couple ways you could do it. I could have steamed the cauliflower first, or steamed it at this point in a steamer. But I find it's very easy and fun, actually, to kind of just stir fry it in a pan here. So I'm going to add some oil. If you are using butter in your cooking, a little bit of butter tastes great in this. What I do is I tend to saute with a little bit of olive oil. This actually is avocado oil, which is also very good for sauteing. I put a little bit of that in. I will saute, and you just saute for about 5 minutes until you can see that your rice, right, cauli rice, your rice is softened up a bit. And I actually did a little bit more than the 3 cups that the recipe calls for. I'm going to leave this for later on to cook up at another time. But just to show you, we've got our skillet. Now, if you wanted to do this more like a pilaf for a different dish, what you can do is, before you add in your cauliflower, chop up some onions, chop up some red pepper or green pepper, and soften those first, and then add in your cauliflower. If you want it to be more like a Spanish rice, add in some tomatoes. All right. So you can see the consistency. I'm going to push it up, pull it up again, just in case you didn't see it the first time. It really, really looks like rice. And in your dish, it may not absorb as many of the liquids, but it definitely has that feel of having rice with far less carbs and far more vitamin C. You're also getting fiber. If you're doing white rice, you're not getting fiber. So this is a great substitute for white rice. So typically this will cook for about 5 minutes, maybe a little bit more if you have a lot. This is a full pan here. The nice thing about cauli rice is, no matter how much it's cooked, it tastes pretty good. I'm going to add in a little bit of salt, pinch of salt, and a couple of cranks of cracked pepper. And I can check on here's the dish as it's going. I'm going to give this a little stir. Now, as I said, you can add a pat of butter to this before serving. Adds an awesome flavor to it. I'm also going to add in some of that parsley. Guess I didn't fully chop all of this parsley, so I'm just going to tear up a few of those. I like seeing those little green bits in it. Growing up, we used to call that parsley rice or parsley potatoes. Do you remember that? All right, I'm going to turn this off. This is pretty much done. Just wipe down my cutting board here. And let me grab a plate. right. So, unfortunately, my cabbage is still quite firm, so I may not be able to plate it. But it's cooking up and smelling delicious. All right, well, we are just going to pretend that everything was cooked up. So I'm going to put my rice down. And I'm going to ladle in some of our cabbage. And we can top it off with a little bit of our chopped parsley. I'm going to add in some more chopped parsley too. Remember, I only put in half before. Let's get this out of the way. All right. And there you have it. This is our unstuffed cabbage roll. I hope you try it. If you do, send me an email or text me right here. Let me know. If any of you are interested in learning more about eating seasonally or would like to find out more about the cleanse program, we're doing it as a group right now, but it's also self-motivated. So you are able to do it on your own with all of the information that is provided. Just private message me, send me a text, however, and I'd be happy to tell you more about that. Until then, hope to see you next week. Hope everything's going well. If you have any questions, by all means, put a question in the side tab there, and I'll be happy to answer. Take care now. Stay well. Stay healthy.
Call from Bentonville, IL.